On behalf of the Salt Lake Chamber, welcome to our 2020 Gubernatorial Candidate Forum. This forum is part of our series of covering all of the major races that you will be asked to vote on this fall. These forums will typically be held on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock. We'll also cover some additional special topic issues on Thursdays, and we invite you to join those as well. You can find more information on all of these forums at slchamber.com. My name is JC Skinner. I am the General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Policy here at the Salt Lake Chamber. I'm joined by my co-host today, Craig Wagstaff, who is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Dominion Energy and the current Chair of the Salt Lake Chamber Board of Governors. We are streaming live today here from our Chamber offices.
Thanks, JC. Today's forum will focus on the issues facing the state and those items that are of interest to our community. Each candidate will have approximately 30 minutes to respond to a set of questions. The number of questions each candidate will be able to answer will depend on the length of their answers. So to waste no further time, let me introduce our first candidate and let's get started. So first off, we begin with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. He is a graduate of Utah State University and also the Washington and Lee School of Law. After law school, he clerked for the Judge Stewart and then worked at the law firm of Fabian Kleinden, and then he moved back home to his hometown of Fairview, where he joined his family's telecommunications business, Centricom, and started his public service as a member of the Fairview City Council. He then served as a mayor and a member of the county commission. He served as a member of the State House of Representatives, and as a freshman representative was appointed as lieutenant governor. A focus of his campaign has been visiting all 248 cities and towns. So, introductory question, thank you for joining us, Lieutenant Governor Cox. Given your history of public service, who is your political role model and who do you try to emulate in your service to the state?
Well, thank you, Craig and JC. It's great to be with you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the Chamber taking on this as they did during the primary election, and I'm grateful to be able to be back with you. I've actually been asked this question before, and of course, I would get in trouble if I didn't mention Governor Herbert, with whom I've been serving over the past 7 years. It's been the honor of a lifetime to serve as his lieutenant governor. I was greatly surprised when he asked me to do that as a freshman legislator, just 9 months into my service there. But it has been an incredible opportunity to learn from someone who understands the power of bringing people together, has never been divisive, but has shown that there is a better way here in the state of Utah. But to give you the best answer, though, I have to point to my own father. I had the opportunity to serve as the mayor of Fairview several years ago. And my dad was the mayor of Fairview when I was 8 years old. And it was his devotion and dedication to our little town that first caught my interest and maintained my interest in public service. And so without my dad, I certainly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today.
Well, thank you. I thought we should get the most obvious question out of the way first. The current pandemic and health crisis has commanded everyone's attention for most of the last year. What would be and what is your #1 priority for short-term economic recovery?
Sure. So you're right, JC. This is all that we talk about, and for good reason. This is something that hasn't happened for over 100 years here in our country, and our state is impacted, as is every state in the nation and every nation in the world. And so when we look at economic recovery, first some good news, and that is that Utah is leading the nation in short-term economic recovery, and it's because of the things that we have been doing, that we have put in place, and by we I mean the citizens of the state of Utah, the way that they have responded. There is this false choice that is made between health and the economy. We know that that's not true, that we have to work on both of these things together. And so I don't have to tell you what I would do, because I can tell you what I am doing. I reached out to Taylor Randall, the Dean of the University of Utah School of Business, and brought him in to help coordinate our response together with the Chamber and so many other groups that are working on this. And we are reaching out to individual businesses, working with people to help them stay open, to help them use best practices to be safe throughout this pandemic, and then to help those people who have lost their jobs. To me, the critical piece of this is getting training for those, because we have jobs that are available right now, but sometimes the skill set does not match up with the jobs. We've done a poor job of this in the United States over the past 40 years of upskilling and reskilling people. The old economy, you would learn a trade, or you would go to college and you would have all the knowledge you needed for most of your career. And that's no longer true. We have to change that mindset and make sure that we are investing in our technical institutions here in the state to help provide people with new skills and help them be able to obtain the jobs that are existing right now and the jobs that are coming in the future.
Thank you. We know that we will recover from this, and eventually we can get back to our business as usual, we hope. In that line, what is your number one priority for our long-term economic stability and growth?
Yeah, so when we look at the numbers right now, and again, our unemployment here in the state of Utah is 4.1%. It's the second lowest. Nebraska passed us by just a fraction of a percentage. We led the nation last month. We've had the fewest job losses of any state in the nation over the past 6 months. But we have to look to that long term. When we look at recovery, we don't want to recover to where we were. We want to recover to something better. And Utah is the best positioned state in the nation for that long-term recovery. And that's not me saying it. Forbes magazine has said it. The White House has said it. Harvard University has said it. We are so well positioned. And there's a couple areas that I think we really need to focus on. And one is manufacturing. We have seen supply chains disrupted in our nation and across the world in ways that many people never imagined could happen. The good news is that those supply chains are coming back to our shores. And because of what's been happening in Utah, what's been happening with our economy over the past 10 years, the best performing economy in the country over that time, and the most diverse economy in the country over the past 10 years, we are well situated to take advantage of that manufacturing coming back here with the inland port and other opportunities that we've been working on over the past several years. So that's one area where we can make a tremendous difference. The other piece of that long-term recovery, I believe, is making sure that Utah does not get left behind. And we have to be very careful, because with the economic growth that we've seen over the past decade, not everyone has enjoyed that. As someone who lives in rural Utah, who is raising their family in rural Utah, I recognize that there are many parts of rural Utah who have been left out. And so there are things we can do to improve there. And one of my big initiatives before the coronavirus was a telework initiative, an experiment that we did with 130 employees at the state office building. And we allowed them to work from home 3 to 5 days a week. We measured everything that they did, and there were lots of reasons for that. But I'll cut to the end of the story. And the end of the story is that it was more successful than we ever imagined. Of course, we were taking cars off the road and pollution out of the air. It turns out they were actually happier. We measured their mental health every week to see how they were doing. Their productivity went up 22%, which is just remarkable. To me, the part I was excited about is that means that these are jobs, and we were having a hard time filling many of those jobs because unemployment was at 2.3%, the lowest in our state's history. Those are jobs now that people in rural Utah with a broadband connection can now apply for. And now, with the coronavirus, our goal was to have 2,500 people working from home for the state by the end of this year. We far exceeded that because, again, of the impacts of the coronavirus. And that's going to open the economy up for rural Utahns. And for people who grew up in rural Utah, like me, who want to move back home and take their jobs with them, now they can live anywhere and still have successful careers. And that's a game changer. So those are two areas for our long-term impact where we can make sure that Utah is well poised for the best workforce in the country, and make sure that everyone enjoys the prosperity that we're seeing on the Wasatch Front.
Very good. Thank you, Spencer. So recently, a picture has been trending on Twitter of two girls in California sitting outside a Taco Bell so that they can use the free Wi-Fi. This pandemic was brought to light this pandemic has brought to light the need for every student to have a device and adequate home broadband connection. How would you propose modernizing the broadband funding and make sure that every student who is in need of a device has one and has a connection at home? And what, if any, role should the state play?
Yeah, so I did see that picture actually as it was trending, and we've seen things like that here in Utah as well. We've actually seen them in church parking lots and other places connecting to the Wi-Fi there. The reason I'm so passionate about this is what I did. This was my job. For 10 years, I ran a rural telecommunications company. And our goal was to bring broadband to places that didn't have it. And we were very successful in doing that. It may surprise people to know that Utah is well recognized across the country for being one of the most well-connected states, even in rural areas. However, there are some rural areas that are being left out. And there are projects right now that are happening to close those gaps. There's a big fiber project happening in our smallest county in Daggett, up by Flaming Gorge in those areas. Another one happening down in San Juan County to help connect some of our towns on the reservation, which is one of the areas, especially our Native American community, that has been left out and doesn't have the connection that they need. Of course, we are seeing a lack of connectivity in our urban centers as well. And so we have to work closely to do this. Some good news is that many school districts have been able to use CARES Act funding to help obtain devices for students so that we can have devices. We're really lucky in our rural community. It's something that has been prioritized by our district, and our kids here in middle school and high school all have devices. And so that's a big step that we've been able to make, and I believe every district should do that and can do that. Again, CARES Act funding is helping with that, but the state does have a role to play. We have to be supportive. And look, this is one of my biggest concerns. We just launched some ads, some of our campaign ads this past week, dealing specifically with the issue of a disparity, a lack of equity in education between students that may just live a few miles apart. We talk about funding and how important that is, and our Constitution guarantees a quality education for all students. And yet, far too often, students on the east side or in places like Park City have copious amounts of funding compared with those on the west side or in rural Utah. Sometimes more than double the amount of funding per student in those areas, which makes it very difficult to have things like devices and broadband. And so this is an area that we have to tackle, and I will be working with the legislature to find ways to improve that equity distribution across the state so that every child gets a quality education that is guaranteed to them under the state's constitution.
I want to stick on the topic related to education here for a moment. Obviously, at the Salt Lake Chamber, we're very concerned with the development of our workforce and making sure that our workforce can meet the needs of our members and of the business community. What will your educational priorities be to ensure that the educational system can meet the changing workforce needs and our currently shifting economy?
Yeah, so this is, gosh, I talk about this a lot, but it's so important. We've made a huge mistake in our country over the last 40 years. This idea that every kid needs a bachelor's degree. It's bad for our economy, and it's bad for our kids who have incredible aptitudes that should be developed. But we've made parents and kids feel guilty if they don't go to college, and for kids with different attributes, they end up feeling like obligated to go to college. And then after a year or two, they drop out. Now they don't have a degree and they have debt, which is the worst of all scenarios. You also mentioned the changing economy. And I had a friend, I've shared this before, but he retired a few years ago. And he said when he graduated from college, he had all the knowledge that he needed for the first 30 years of his career. And I just laughed. And I said that, that will never happen again because the nature of work is changing so very rapidly. And that's why our priorities have to change with that. We have separated education from work for far too long to our detriment. We should be providing real work opportunities in high school and even in middle school so kids can get a range of experiences, figure out what they're good at, figure out what they're passionate about, figure out where their interests lie, and then we should encourage them and make it possible for them to accomplish that. Now, we do need post-secondary education. I think that that's important for everybody, but sometimes that's a 6-month certificate at one of our UTech institutions. If we expand apprenticeships, and we've been doing a lot of this here in the state of Utah with Talent Ready Utah, which is a model for the rest of the nation, but we need more of that. We've got students in some of our districts that are able to graduate from high school with certificates in aerospace manufacturing and immediately be able to go out and get good paying jobs. And the best part is a lot of these employers will actually pay for them to go on and enhance their education as they move into new skill sets throughout the company. And so we can do more of that here in the state of Utah, and that will be a major priority for my administration if we get the opportunity to serve over the next 4 years.
Follow up on that question just a little bit. What are your priorities? What will be your priorities in relation to public education? We have a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year. Education funding is always a top topic of discussion. What are your priorities in that area?
Yeah, so I've been fairly vocal about the need for more educational funding. Look, we have a teacher shortage here in the state of Utah, and when you sit down and talk to teachers and family members that are teaching in public schools, my kids go to North Sanpete Middle School and North Sanpete High School right now, and this teacher shortage, even before the pandemic, was acute for a couple reasons. One of those reasons is very simple and I think very obvious to everyone, and that is that we are not paying our teachers enough. We have to do more there to make sure that that being a teacher is a destination occupation, not just a filler occupation. We lose a significant amount of our teachers. I think the number is about half of our teachers in the first 5 years that they teach. That's a remarkable number. And it's in large part because, again, we're not paying them. But there's something else when we surveyed teachers, and it turns out that was actually the second leading reason that we were losing teachers was pay. It wasn't number one. What was number one is that we are over-regulating our teachers and taking the joy out of teaching. When you talk to teachers that are in their first year or in their 30th year, they will tell you that it is all-consuming. And again, this is pre-COVID. And of course, the coronavirus has put an added amount of stress on them as they are working to teach both in person and online and trying to juggle all of those challenges. And so what we've done is with that regulatory piece, we have the high stakes testing and school grading, things that there is no evidence that are doing anything to improve the outcomes or enhance the education of our children. What they are doing is driving teachers away. And so we have to get back to allowing teachers to be the entrepreneurs of the classroom. And so in addition to increasing funding for teacher education, we will be focused on a complete regulatory review of everything we are asking our teachers to do. We have school districts that have to file over 300 reports annually, which is ridiculous. It's crazy. Now, not all of those are at the state level. Some of those are at the federal level, but still there is a state component to this and more that we can do to make sure that we improve the ability for teachers to do what they do best, and that is teach, restore the joy of teaching to the classroom, and we will be able to close that teacher gap that we have right now.
Very good. Although not always recognized in Utah, Utah is a diverse state. Here at the Salt Lake Chamber, we certainly are actively engaged and focused to make sure that this moment of focus on the importance on diversity and inclusion does not pass us without resulting in real change. As governor, how will you ensure that Utah is viewed and is an inclusive place?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Of course, we are having a moment in our nation, and very important conversations are happening. They're happening at the state level for sure. You mentioned that Utah is often referred to as a state without any diversity. I've heard it said many times, we're the whitest state in the nation, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I think we rank about 16th or 17th, somewhere in there, when it comes to diversity. We have about 14% of our population is Latino, and we have a very large, of course, Native American population, a very large Pacific Islander population as well. And so we do have significant diversity here in our state. We have had some just incredible opportunities over the past several months. I've been very fortunate over the past 7 years to chair the Multicultural Commission in our state. And we work very diligently, often in obscurity, as we work through policy issues and making sure that everyone in our state feels included and feels represented. What has happened during the coronavirus, and of course with the just tragic murder of George Floyd, is that our work is now being elevated, and people are coming, legislators and policymakers are listening to what's happening. And the coronavirus as well has shown some of those gaps in other areas like healthcare that are occurring for our Latino population. Although they make up 14% of the state, at one point they made up about 44% of our cases. The good news is, since we've really put a focus on there, that has come down now to, I think, the low 30s. But we're trending in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. Our Multicultural Commission has joined together with the Martin Luther King Commission that has existed here in the state for a long time. And we have been working closely with our law enforcement community, and I have to give credit to our law enforcement community as well. Commissioner of Public Safety Jess Anderson and police chiefs across the state, our sheriffs have all stepped up to reach out and work on ways to improve relationships and to overcome some of these biases and implicit biases that exist, making sure that we have an understanding in our community. But an important piece of this is that government should be a reflection of its people, and we have to. The nature of government is, my wife calls it STP. It's the same 10 people. It's the same group often that are involved in government. And when there's changes, we sometimes shuffle the deck chairs, but the same people remain involved. We have to be intentional about reaching out and being much more inclusive. And that includes gender diversity as well as racial diversity. There are incredibly qualified people out there who are often overlooked. And there are ways that we can, again, reach out, encourage them to apply. We have over 400 boards and commissions in this state. Most people have no idea there are that many, and we're often begging people to fill those slots and those spots. And so we have to improve our outreach, listening to each other. I will never know what it's like to be a Hispanic man or a Black man here in Utah. I can't have that experience. But what I do believe is that if we get proximate, if we get close, and if we listen to each other, we can learn from each other. We can start to see the world through someone else's eyes. And that allows us to make improvements. It allows us to change government, and it allows us to make sure that we aren't negatively impacting anyone. We believe in equal opportunity, but we have to work for that equal opportunity so that everyone can participate in the Utah dream. And that's something that Senator Henderson and I are committed to.
Very good. So how will you support minority-owned businesses?
Yeah, so this is something we've been working on over the past couple months. One of the things that came out during the pandemic, you remember Congress passed the CARES Act, and with that CARES Act, we had the PPP loans that were meant for businesses to help them be able to retain their employees. In fact, if they keep their doors open and retain their employees, then the loans would be forgiven. They would turn into grants. And so one of the really cool things here in Utah was that we led the nation in getting those loans to people. We were the most efficient at it. And by the way, our banks deserve a tremendous amount of credit. Large banks, small banks, everyone jumped in and participated to make that happen. It's one of the reasons I believe that Utah's economy has performed so much better than any other state. But as they went through, if you remember, there was a first tranche of that money, and then it closed. And we went through and we got done, and everybody was excited because we had gotten all of that money out, and businesses were continuing. And then we started to look at the demographics of those loans, and it turned out that so many of our minority businesses were actually left out from getting those loans, and that was problematic. It was unacceptable. And so through the Multicultural Commission, we've done a couple things. We did a survey of multicultural businesses, minority-owned businesses across the state, and we found out so much about how we were communicating with them, the type of information that was being shared, the translation services that were sometimes missing and lacking, and more importantly, their access to capital, which is key to any business. If you don't have access to funding, then it's impossible. And we sat down with some of the business leaders in the state. I have to give a special shout out to Zions Bank, who was very critical in making this happen. And when that second tranche of funding came for the PPP loans, there was a specific focus put on our minority community. And there are dozens and dozens of examples of minority-owned businesses that were this time able to take advantage of those PPP funds and keep their doors open. And so what's coming out of that now is we have learned some valuable lessons, again, about how to improve communications with our minority communities, how to make sure that they're able to participate in these program grants and loans that are happening out there right now. And we're doing that through the state funding grants that have been put in place through the help of the chamber to keep businesses healthy and keep them open. And that's going to continue coming out of the pandemic. So while there aren't many silver linings, there are a few, and one of them is that it vastly improved our communication with our multicultural communities.
How will you support rural economic development and businesses? I know you've touched on this a bit. Could you expand a bit further?
Yeah, so this is the reason I got involved in public service in the very first place. As somebody who's run a business in rural Utah, I recognize the unique challenges that exist out there, and we were fortunate. We were able to double in size during the Great Recession, but many businesses were not as fortunate as we were, and so this is critical. We need rural representation. We've talked about getting more women involved in state government. We've talked about getting more of our minority communities involved in state government. We also need geographic representation in rural government. The Wasatch Front is amazing and it's incredible. And that's where the majority of our people are. And so it gets the most attention, and it should. If you look at the legislature, we only have about 3 senators right now out of 29 that I would consider actually rural, and their Senate districts are so large, and that happens. It's just the way that redistricting works, and it's going to happen again next year. And so we have to be much more vigilant. And there's a couple things that I've said. I'm going to have a rural chief of staff who will work on rural issues constantly. We have to review everything that we've done. Every year, the legislature passes something to help rural Utah, which is great. Unfortunately, now we have about 20 programs, and none of them perform the way they were intended to. We have to really consolidate, again, make sure the good information is available in our rural areas, and then use some of the incredible things that are coming out of this. I already talked about telework, but there are other things that are coming out of this as well. Telehealth and teleeducation, all of those things will allow people in rural Utah to take advantage of the services and the prosperity that's happening here in our state. But we also we incentivize all kinds of businesses to come to the Wasatch Front, where we had a hard time finding employees. They would come to the Wasatch Front, and it's getting crowded, and they were probably coming anyway. We should be focusing those incentives on businesses who are willing to locate off the Wasatch Front, where there are great employees, where there is land and cheap electricity and the opportunity to grow. And again, it takes they don't have the bad air that we have on the Wasatch Front, don't have the transportation problems that we have. That's where we should be focusing our opportunities. So again, we can make sure that every county in the state is able to enjoy the prosperity that the rest of the state has right now.
Thank you. We just have a little bit over 2 minutes left, and so I'm going to ask you a hybrid question. One, I'm just going to point out that in our country has become more and more polarized. Divides are becoming greater. Utah has not been immune. As governor, what would you do to make the state more unified to help bridge those divides? And then I'm also going to ask you just to leave us with your final comments and parting words.
Well, again, Craig and JC and everyone at the Chamber and those who are paying attention and listening, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to address you. This is why I'm running. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, I guess, my wife and I sat down and we were trying to decide if we were going to do this or not. And we had the very conversation that this question is asking, JC. And we believe fundamentally that politics is broken in our country. It's become a competition to tear people down. We have negative campaigns, millions and millions of dollars being poured into that. And we made a conscious decision that one, if we were going to run, we were going to do things differently, that we truly believe that Utah is unique, that Utah is special, that we have the opportunity to show the rest of the nation that there is a different way to do this, a better way to do this. And so that was our commitment, and we launched our campaign, and that's what we did. We would only run positive ads. We would only talk about the issues that were important to us without tearing down others who were running for office. And it was wonderful until it wasn't, until everybody decided to attack us, until the negative ads started coming and the hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars were being poured in, everyone ganging up on us and trying to make us look bad, stretching the truth, all those types of things that we see every day. And unfortunately it works, but we wanted to prove that we could do it differently. And there was a gut check moment. There was a moment where we looked at each other. We knew we could win if we went negative. We weren't sure if we could win if we stayed positive, but we decided that if that's what it took to be governor, then we weren't interested. And so we stayed positive, and I'm so glad we did. It was close, but in the end, we were able to come out as the Republican nominee for governor. And I believe, and I will close with this, this is my promise to the citizens of the state of Utah, that I will always, always be a positive person, that I will work on uniting people. That doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but we can agree without being disagreeable, and we can set a standard for the rest of the nation. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for being here with us today. We genuinely appreciate that. And we know that our members do as well. We are going to fade to black for just one moment while we bring in our next candidate, Professor Chris Peterson.
Our next candidate is Professor Peterson, who is a fifth-year generation Utahn and a law professor who was raised by a disabled single mother in West Valley City. Following graduation from law school, Peterson worked as a law clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. He then moved to Washington, D.C. to work as a consumer rights attorney for a nonprofit on Capitol Hill. He then began his teaching career as a law professor at the University of Florida. After publishing an award-winning book and numerous scholarly articles, he returned to Utah to teach at his alma mater, the University of Utah. Chris lives in Salt Lake City with his wife and 3 children. The Petersons enjoy hiking, camping, and skiing in Utah's majestic outdoors. Chris, thank you for joining us today. And as a first-time candidate, what motivated you to run for office and for governor specifically?
Well, you know, first off, let me say thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for putting this event together. It's an honor to be here. I'm very excited to have a chance to speak about some of the issues that I believe are important for the future of the state. Why am I running for governor? Well, because my whole career I've tried to focus on making a difference in the lives of ordinary people. I've tried to be a good mentor as a teacher, and also in my public service, try to find the issues where our ordinary working families are being left behind and not cared for sufficiently. I care about people. And so when the Democratic Party came and asked me, encouraged me to run for governor, I'll be honest, at first I laughed and said, absolutely not. But as I thought more and more about what really matters to me in this world, it was just too hard for me to say no to trying to raise the profile of some of the big issues of our time and talk about some of the solutions that I believe that we need to look to in this state. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to talk about some of those policy issues.
Thank you so much, and we do appreciate you being here. We are going to start with the elephant in the room question. The nation and our state has been entirely focused on the pandemic for the last 6 months, I suppose, however long it has been. Given its effect on the economy and the crisis that has resulted, what will be your number one priority to address those short-term economic needs?
Well, the biggest problem we're facing in the state right now is, without question, the coronavirus crisis. And I'm very concerned that in recent weeks, we've seen the numbers of infections spiking yet again. And we see that the positive testing rates are also, in some areas of the state, getting back to 15 to 20%. I've assembled a team of scientific experts and medical doctors, and they are very concerned about the potential fallout for this for people all across the state. So what do we need to do to get back on track and to protect our people and the jobs that are at risk and the small businesses that are on the verge of collapse from the coronavirus crisis? Step one, I've called since July for a statewide mask mandate where social distancing is not possible. Now, nobody's saying that if you're working on a ranch out on 30 acres that you've got to have a mask on while you're doing that. But if you're not capable of maintaining social distance, then we need to have you wearing a mask, not just to protect yourself, but to protect others. All of the best scientific evidence clearly confirms that the masks are one of the simple, most effective ways we have to try to control the spread of the virus. Two, we need to make sure that we are getting our test processing times down to no more than 24 hours. 7 months into this crisis, we're still waiting 2, 3, 4, sometimes 7 days for our coronavirus test to get processed. In the intervening period of time, people don't know whether or not it's safe for them to go back to work or to school, and they're making hard decisions about whether or not to expose others to risk. And also, that leads me to 3, because people don't know whether or not they've got the disease or not, that creates a greater stress on our contact tracing. If you find out that somebody has been waiting for 7 days to get that coronavirus test processed, the number of people they've potentially exposed to the disease grows exponentially. I believe that we need to triple or even quadruple the number of contact tracers so we can track down people who may have been exposed to the disease and get them safely and humanely quarantined and tested to make sure that we know what's happening in our communities. And finally, fourth, we need to have the best available technology and resources out there in the community to try to take care of people. 7 months into this crisis, I am quite distressed to find that we still cannot buy, as normal citizens and businesses, the best available protection. N95 respirator masks only cost about $1 in normal times. Why has our country not ramped up production to make sure that our frontline workers, including restaurant servers, public school teachers, bus drivers, meat packers, don't have access to the best available protective equipment? As governor, I will make that a priority and do everything within the power of the government of the state of Utah to ensure that we get that best possible technology out there. Instead, we've been wasting time, energy, public attention, and money on strategies and equipment and medicines that don't actually work, whether that's hydroxychloroquine, which is not proven by science to actually provide any protection to people, or a cell phone application that we spent millions of dollars on and are still paying for, even though it doesn't actually work. And at the same time, we have 3 public healthcare clinics in Ogden, Salt Lake City, and Provo that are being shut down because of a relatively minor budget shortfall of $2.5 million. That's less than the amount of money we wasted on that cell phone application that doesn't work. I'm also scandalized to learn that apparently there was comparable cell phone technology available for free. That's not good enough. We need to get solutions and results. And look, it's not personal. I'm not trying to be negative. I just want to do what we need to do to take care of our communities. The simple fact is that, this is a dangerous virus. It's not smallpox or Ebola, but it's not the common flu or a common cold. Now, about 200,000 Americans have perished. That's more people than died in the First World War, and more people than died in all of the combat operations since the Second World War, including Korea, the Vietnamese War, and all the Middle Eastern wars combined. Right now in Utah, more people have died from the coronavirus crisis than all of our traffic fatalities combined. And it's not just the deaths, it's also the permanent lung scarring, the kidney damage, the heart damage, and for some people, even brain damage. This is a serious virus, and we don't know how long it's going to last for some people. So we've got to stop the spread of this virus so people feel safe to go back to businesses, to go back and start shopping at storefront retailers again, to get out to those movie theaters, to music venues, to go to the restaurants. And we need to do it across the state, because when we're only doing this patchwork, we're seeding the virus in different areas and not managing to clamp down across the entire state in order to keep everyone safe. So long answer, but it's a detailed answer because it's time for leadership and for some seriousness of purpose in protecting our businesses and our citizens from this dangerous disease. Thank you.
Thank you. We all hope that, and we've all learned that we can't just focus on the virus throughout this. We've got to pay attention to those underlying infrastructures and priorities as well. So to shift focus just a little bit, as governor, what would your number one long-term economic priority be?
Well, we've got to grow back better than we were before and try to build a vibrant economy for the future that's competitive and takes care of people in a broad way. So some steps that I think we should be looking to. Right now, interest rates are at rock bottom level. There's a real incentive, I think, for the state to consider bonding for shovel-ready infrastructure projects, things like development of rural broadband. In Maine, the public just approved a bond measure by a wide margin to try to increase rural broadband in Maine. We should be looking at the same kind of projects right here in Utah to try to facilitate some of that teleworking and also telehealth, telemedicine across the state, and try to push out some of those great Silicon Slopes jobs. I'm a big fan, but we can also make the Silicon Slopes labor market dollar go farther by allowing some of those workers to work in farther flung areas of our state, down in Blanding or in Moab, and then commute up once or twice a week, once a month, in addition to teleworking. And then those employees are going to get the benefit of our spectacular public lands in this state, as well as our innovative and exciting economy. So I think we need to do that. I also think that we should be working on other infrastructure projects in the short term to try to increase jobs, including water, road, and public transit infrastructure. And then also longer term, we've got to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to get our education house in order, to try to train up our workforce to handle those jobs of the future. I would love to get together with the business community, with the Silicon Slopes folks, people in aerospace and in biosciences, and talk about what kind of labor market we need, not just this year, not just in 5 years, but in 10 and 15 years, and then re-engineer our public school system, including K through 12 education, our community colleges, our two-year colleges, our research universities, to try to build that workforce, figure out the skill sets that they need, and go back and reinvent all this and pipeline in the best workforce in the world to facilitate our development for the future.
Very good. So recently, many of us have seen a photo out there on Twitter of these two girls in California sitting outside a Taco Bell to use the Wi-Fi for free. So obviously it's become apparent that every student needs access to free Wi-Fi as well as broadband. And you touched a bit on this in your previous response, but what is your plan to ensure that every student has Wi-Fi access, and what do you feel the state's role is in this?
focus on it and get the job done. Right now, in several of our counties, a majority of the residents don't have any internet access at all, let alone broadband access. So counties like San Juan and Rich County, my understanding is that we still have a majority of zero internet access. That's not good enough for a state like ours that's looking forward to the future. That's why I think that we need to invest in public-private partnerships to get the job done. We in our society, in the greatest years of American history, we used government infrastructure to facilitate the platforms in which commerce was accomplished. Back in, when we built the interstate highway system, when we built the transcontinental railroad, that was done by cooperation between governments and private industry to get the job done. And, frankly, we've made some progress, but we have so much further to go. And I'd like to put my energy and excitement and enthusiasm and the muscle of the state of Utah behind getting the job done for those kids and for our businesses all across the state.
Thank you. You've touched on our next question a little bit, so I'm going to combine two. But we want to talk about what your educational priorities will be to make sure that as our economy shifts, our workforce can meet those needs. But in addition to that, what will your public education priorities be?
Well, I have talked a bit about it because it's one of my highest priorities. But the next thing I'd like to speak about is the chronic, what I believe is underfunding of our public school system. I think we all know that Utah has for decades have had the lowest per pupil funding for our public school systems in America. And there's some challenges that we face. First off, we have large families, and I've got 3 kids, and I celebrate that. That's part of our culture, and that's just fine. And also, we have about 2/3 of our public land is owned by the federal government, and they don't pay property taxes in the same way, which makes it a little bit more challenging for us to get funding for our public schools. But that's not good enough. We have to overcome that challenge and actually rise to the occasion. So how can we do that? Well, we've got to get the funding into those schools that we need, because right now in our public school system, 1 in 4 fourth graders cannot read at a basic level. In the 21st century, when Utah is going to be competing against the Chinese, against Southeast Asians and the Europeans, we have to have kids that can read. And that's already, when they get in that position, they're already drifting off into those junior high years. And then by high school, 1 in 8 kids is not graduating on time. Those are wasted opportunities for us to build community and build business in our society. So I think that we need to get more direct instructional resources to those kids. We need to identify who it is that's struggling to learn how to read and get somebody to help work it out and get the people, the resources into those schools to succeed. And that's going to mean more teachers. It's going to mean smaller class sizes. It's going to mean more technology, more cutting edge services available to the kids. And it also means that we've got to get the support staff that's available. We're fiscally prudent in this state, and I'm fiscally conservative too. I believe in living within my means, and I believe that government and business need to do that as well. But you can't cut the bone without suffering some harm. We need to make sure we've got the guidance counselors and the school nurses in place to take care of those kids that are being left behind. So I'm going to fight to do that. And I think that in our diversified economy, with all of the exciting things that we have going on in our state, from agriculture to tourism, to our extraction industries, to our high-tech sector, to our growing and fascinating and really exciting banking sector, which I hope we get to talk about. We have the resources in this state to invest in our future. And if we're not doing so, then we're not setting ourselves and our kids up for success down the road.
Thank you. So Utah, not always perceived as a diverse state, but actually is. Here at the Chamber, we are extremely focused on diversity and inclusion as we move forward at this moment in time. It's an important thing for our state. And what are your thoughts on diversity and inclusion? And how do you feel you're going to go about to ensure that Utah is actually doing something that actually is perceived as a state with the diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. I'm so glad that you asked that question. And I'm so grateful to the Chamber of Commerce for focusing on it, because I do believe it is one of the great challenges of our time. Across the country and here in Utah, we have a lot of hurt feelings and struggle that's happening right now. And I want to speak first off to the Black and people of color and Indigenous folks in the state of Utah, that I see you and I care about you. Your lives matter to me. And if I'm elected governor, I'm going to be in your corner and fighting for you. And I want you to know that. At the same time, I also think that I want to mention that I also have great respect for our law enforcement, and that somehow we've got to find a path through some of the conflict that we're seeing where we can build together to find compromise and reestablish trust and love for our neighbors. So that's what I want to focus on. But I also think that the question is a little bit more pointed than that in terms of how we can help minority-owned businesses and how the state government can lead in trying to include diverse voices in state government. So the first thing I'd like to do is make a commitment today. As we are now more diverse than at any time in Utah's history, I commit to appointing the most diverse executive branch of government in the history of the state of Utah. I know that I'm not the best messenger on this necessarily. I am just another white guy, but I'm proud that I'm trying to lift up and celebrate other voices within my campaign and within the course of my life. So that's a commitment that I'm making here today. In addition, I want to try to do everything that I can to facilitate the development of minority-owned businesses. Things like, for example, trying to make sure that they have help and assistance in trying to get certified for federal minority-owned business set-asides. That's something where the government can have a role, especially the Governor's Office of Economic Development, in providing some counseling and mentoring. I also want to work with the Chamber of Commerce and the Multicultural Commission to try to develop mentoring programs more broadly across the economy and to make sure that we're setting a good tone and a good example to give minority-owned businesses all the opportunities that they need.
Very good. Can you also talk a bit further about how you'll support rural economic development as well as rural business?
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about that too. You know, I did grow up here in the Salt Lake Valley in West Valley City. Grew up with very limited income and was, struggled. Our family did when I was a kid. And so I want the folks in rural Utah to know that I'm kind of a guy that tends to pull for the underdog. And I look to rural Utah as a part of our state that too often is being left behind. I want folks in Price and in Blanding and other, just as examples, to know that I care about them and that I'm going to be fighting to make sure that they get access to the richness and the rewards of our society. So what are some ideas about increasing rural economic development? First off, I've already mentioned rural broadband, which I think is one of the most important initiatives that we can engage in, and it's going to be one of my highest priorities that really could revolutionize the ability of people to live in rural areas but still contribute to 21st century economic commerce. Second, I want to propose a meat packing cooperative. I've been trying to meet with and talk to ranchers and farmers all around the state, and some of the small ranchers and farmers have told me that they face real challenges in their supply chain and also in getting fair pricing for their livestock. And I think that just as we have some cooperatives that can provide a nice alternative in the banking sector, we can have some similar competition from a nonprofit member-owned cooperative in the meatpacking industry. Next, I think that we need to do more to try to help rural kids who grow up in rural Utah and then go into schools, get some student loan debt, and then decide that there's not enough economic wealth out in rural areas. Today, I'd like to propose a Future Farmers Success Act, where I would propose to try to create public service student loan forgiveness for family farm and ranchers. So currently under federal law, if you go into public service for 10 years and make qualifying payments as a police officer or a firefighter or a teacher or a legal aid lawyer, some of my students that leave law school take advantage of this program. After 10 years of qualifying payments, you can have all your student loan debts forgiven. It's an important program that tries to facilitate public service. But I believe that family farms and ranches are an important form of public service too. They're helping us eat the food, provide the food that we all eat. Why not a similar program based around a nonprofit model that's sponsored by the state of Utah to try to help those kids get back to those family farms and ranches and get some student loan debt forgiveness at the same time? So just 3 examples of some of the things that I'd like to do to try to help facilitate rural economic development.
One thing we always know is governors have a bully pulpit. They can do a lot from that position. And as we know, our country has become more and more divided, more and more polarized in nearly every way. As governor, how would you use that position to help bridge those divides? How would you use that position to help make the state more unified?
With civility, with respect, with courtesy, and with honor. I realize that Utah tends to be a Republican state. So if I manage to win this election, then I'm going to have to approach the governor's office with some real humility and recognize that there'll be many people who are suspicious of me. And the thing that I'm going to have to do is make sure that I speak kindly and always listen to both sides of the argument and focus on teamwork and cooperation to try to get things done. I can't control as one candidate, one person, all of the toxic division that we have in our society. But I do want folks that are listening in this platform at this time to know that my Republican friends and neighbors, I care about you and I love you. You're part of my family. Many of my, my own family members are of course Republicans, some are Democrat. We need to look past this division and rebuild the trust in our society to try to go forward. And I actually think that it's a special time in our state right now, and my candidacy presents a bit of an opportunity for the state of Utah. We've had Republican governors for a long time in this state, but in our more distant history, we had some really great Democratic governors that facilitated working across party lines with bipartisanship. People like Scott Matheson Sr. and Cal Rampton, and then going back to the earlier years of the 20th century during the Great Depression, a whole string of excellent Democratic governors. Those are the kinds of reasonable moderates that are focused on getting things done, public service, and doing the right thing by the public that I hope to emulate and try to follow in their footsteps. And I think that actually would be not good, not just for some Democrats, but honestly, I think it'd be kind of good for some Republicans out there. I think that sometimes, with respect, in the Republican Party here in our state at least, I see that the party seems to be drifting a bit far afield from the ordinary mainstream where people are in our state. Just a couple of examples. I know we're running short on time, but in the 2016 election, the public, with a majority vote, voted in favor of Medicaid expansion to better leverage federal tax dollars to provide health care to low-income Utahns. They voted for medical marijuana under the supervision of licensed physicians. And they voted for a fair legislative redistricting initiative to try to create partisan symmetry and have an independent redistricting commission to propose fair legislative boundaries. Good for the good Republicans of Utah for recognizing that it's important to have fair elections and open and transparent process. I was so disappointed. And one of the reasons I was willing to run this race was because the state legislature and the Herbert administration immediately turned around and watered down all three of those ballot measures that the public voted for. That's not right. We're supposed to be living in a democracy in this state. And if the public speaks, I will honor and listen to the public's voice, whether I agree with that initial ballot measure or not, because it's the job of the public servants of our state to implement the will of the people, not special party insiders or privileged elite, but the public of this state. And I'm asking for your confidence and your trust that I will attempt to do the very best that I can to restore the bipartisan tradition of this great state.
Very good. So extremely dry summer we've had this year. August, little or no rain. And as we move into the future, our population is growing. What are your thoughts on ensuring that we have adequate water supply for our increasing population here in the state of Utah?
That's another great question. And it's one of the most important ones that I think we're going to ask. There are reasonable minds that disagree about this, but not amongst scientists. Scientists tell us, an overwhelming majority of scientists say that the greatest challenge we're facing in our generation is the threat of climate change. And climate change models are predicting that we're going to have continuing drier weather in the state of Utah. I've seen some talk that we, in the next 20 to 40 years, could have an 80% reduction in the snowpack of this state. Recall that 80% of our water right now is going to agriculture, one of our most important industries. And that water, before it melts, is going to our snowpack, which is what we ski and snowboard on. And that's the most lucrative sector of our part of our tourism industry. So that's two big sectors of our economy that could be facing a real hit. And there's even more apocalyptic concerns on the horizon where significant portions of the world could start to become uninhabitable because of rising temperatures, drought, increasing natural disasters. We could be facing, look, I used to work at the Pentagon, at the Department of Defense. And currently, the Department of Defense of the United States government believes that the greatest security risk facing this country is climate change. I believe that's one of the greatest challenges that we're going to be facing in the future for business in this state. So what do we need to be doing? Well, first, we need to do our part to try to stop climate change. Utah can't do that alone. We can talk about some strategies that I think are realistic and would also be good for our economy. But we also need to be putting plans in place to make sure that our businesses are resilient to and anticipating where markets are going to go down the road when this becomes a more pressing concern. Things like investing in solar power technology, wind energy, and we have the third highest untapped geothermal energy reserves in the state of in the nation. Geothermal energy, it goes when the rain, whether the rain is blowing or the sun is shining or whether the wind is blowing, it creates energy based on the temperature of the Earth's core. That's the kind of technology that we should be investing in. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's the sort of thing we've got to be looking towards the future to be ready for the changes that are coming.
I want to shift a little bit now to transportation. Craig just mentioned our incredible growth and our projected growth in the future. In order to responsibly manage that growth, we've got to be able to meet the needs of moving our people back and forth and their ability to live and get to their places of work. What are your priorities for transportation planning?
Yeah, so it's another great question. I agree. We've got we have a lot of kids growing up, and we have a lot of people still moving into Utah. Our population is continuing to increase. We're going to have millions more people in the state of Utah. Most of them packing in to the dense, the urban Wasatch Front. And so we're going to have the infrastructure in place to deal with them. That means we're going to have to build some more roads. But I do believe we should be transitioning as quickly as we can to plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles and facilitating the infrastructure to get that transition in place. Just like the British are doing, just like the Norwegians are doing, we need to get in line and follow their lead because that's where the future is. But I also think that we should be thinking about making sure that we're dialing the infrastructure dollars a bit more towards the mass transit and trying to get have the state government work with local communities to try to facilitate walkable neighborhoods where people are living close to where they're working. It decreases the overall cost of transit, and it also can make healthier, happier lives. Some of the greatest neighborhoods in our state are places where people walk to work and walk to school and are living friendly neighborhoods. And I think that we can do more to try to facilitate, especially as we grow. We need to infill and we need to think about ways that we can facilitate that for our developers and also for our homeowners.
Very good. As we wrap up here, we'll allow you to make some closing comments. And again, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for letting me come. I know that I'm the underdog in the race. I figured that coming in. I'm not naive about what I'm facing here. But I do think that sometimes in this state, we have a bit of a challenge in trying to recognize what the challenges are. And it's not to say that we don't have a lot of wonderful things going on. We do have a pretty healthy economy, and I'm very proud of our low unemployment rate. But we also have a lot of people who don't have health insurance. We have a lot of people who have jobs, but they're just that, jobs. They're not careers that are setting them up to be a part of the state of Utah. I want to try to grow our economy with good living wage jobs that give back to our community and strengthen our path into the future. And I want to do so in a respectful way, working with business, working with local government, with courtesy, civility, focused on data and evidence, and bringing people together in broad coalitions around the interests that we all share together to chart a better path for our future. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to compete in this race, and I hope to earn your vote. I hope that you'll listen and take this moment in time. Open governor races, seat governor races do not happen very often in our state. And it's an important moment for us to think about what the right path for the future is. And I believe that I have a vision that's actually pretty productive and exciting. I hope that you'll give me a chance. And in any event, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Peterson, for being here with us. We want to thank Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox for joining us as well. And we want to thank each of you for being here with us. We invite you to join us for each of these forums. Next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, we will have the candidates for the Attorney General's race here with us. Again, invite you to join us at that time. Again, thank you for being here with us.